as the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You're my friend, and you are my brother, even though you are a king. I love you more than any other, so much more than anything. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. I want you more than gold or silver, only you can satisfy. You alone are the real joy giver and the apple of my eye. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee.
Let me get my study up really quick. All right, let's see. How do I move this? Hold on, give me 1 second. There we go. All right. So we've been studying Revelation for, a couple over a year now. We're in Revelation 13, probably the part of the Bible where even non-Christians probably know about it. It talks about the mark of the beast, 666, things like that. And so our previous study, we talked about the image of the beast. Now we're going to look at the mark / name of the beast. And then in the next study, whenever that will be, we'll look at the number of the beast. And, when you tell people that you're going to do a study on the mark of the beast, you either get, one of two reactions. Either you get people really fired up, like, yes, like we're going to talk about microchips and Big Brother watching us. You can't buy or sell. And then another reaction you get is like, oh, you're one of those guys, huh? Yeah, and that's from the other crowd, the people who tend to look down on the people that are, you know, super interested in this type of stuff. I remember I was doing some research last year, and I was looking up like the you know, I think if you, because I wanted to see what would come up if I typed in the mark of the beast on YouTube or on Google, and I typed in the mark of the beast. I think that's what I typed in, or I might have typed in like some RFID microchip, and some of the first videos that show up, I think I typed in mark of the beast microchip or something on YouTube, and one of the top videos was like a news, something from the news talking about, you know, microchips being implanted in your hand. It had nothing to do with the Bible or the mark of the beast, but for some reason, when you typed it in, that was like one of the top hits. And the reason it was is because if you go to the video and read the comments, everybody's in there saying, this is the mark of the beast. This is the mark of the beast. Don't take it. And that's kind of a simplistic way of looking at it, I think. And I think hopefully after today's study, we'll have a better idea of how we should think about this. And how, and it's a good study for like how we should read our Bibles too. And so this is where we're at. We're in Revelation 13. And then I kind of marked out in these different colors here where we talk about the image of the beast, which we talked about last week and a couple weeks ago. And, you know, that's possibly tied to this transhumanism stuff. Is the image of the beast, you know, some sort of like modified humanity rather than it being some type of statue or coin or hologram or whatever people have thrown out there as ideas. You know, that imaging language that John talks about here in Revelation, you know, it's tied back to Genesis chapter 1 when God creates man in his image. And here we see the beast. There's a beast made in the image. There's an image made in the likeness of the beast. And then if we move on to verse 16 down here, it says, also it causes all, both great and small, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is the name of the beast, or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. And so we have three, what I'm kind of calling like signifiers of the beast, you know, and we're looking at them in order. So we got the image of the beast, which we talked about in the past few weeks. Now we're going to look at the mark, and I put the mark / name of the beast because the mark, it says, is tied to the name. And I think that's a very important thing to pay attention to, because a lot of people that talk about, you know, what the mark might be, they kind of skip over the fact that it's tied to the name, of the beast. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll look at the number of the beast. We'll look at 666 and its significance and what that might tell us about the beast. So just like we asked a couple of weeks ago, you know, what is the image in terms of the image of the beast? You know, was it a statue? Was it a coin? You know, something like that, a painting. Now we're going to ask, well, what is the mark? Is it a microchip? You know, I would say that's probably the most popular idea. And then in 2020 with, you know, COVID and stuff like that, the vaccine, people asking, you know, is the vaccine the mark of the beast? No, it's not. The vaccine isn't the mark of the beast. I'll tell you that right now. Neither is it going to be. I don't think I don't think it's going to be a microchip either. I think, as we'll see, it's something. It's a spiritual application to this. There's a spiritual component to these signifiers of the beast. And once again, in order to understand, what John's talking about in a lot of places in the Old Testament, we have to understand. In Revelation, what he's talking about in Revelation. In order to understand that, we have to really know our Old Testament, because John borrows from ideas and he references the Old Testament a lot. And most scholars agree that in terms of the New Testament books, Revelation is the most, it's the book with the most references to the Old Testament. And if you follow the footnotes in Revelation, you'll see they often go back to something in the Old Testament. And so when it comes to Revelation 13, here it is again. And this is just the part talking about the mark of the beast. It says it causes all, both great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless it has the mark, which is the name of the beast. So the mark is tied to the name, or the mark is the same thing as the name of the beast. That's often overlooked, but I think it's very important, or the number of its name. And just like we asked with the image of the beast, do we see this type of language anywhere else in the Bible? Specifically in the Old Testament. Is there an Old Testament reference to this idea? And what do you know? There's actually multiple references. Here in Exodus 13, this was after they left, Israel left Egypt. Moses led them out of Egypt during the night of the Passover. Exodus 13 is talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And if you remember our study from earlier this year, Israel had 7 feasts that they were to observe or partake in every year. And one of them was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And that's tied to Passover. Passover and unleavened bread, they happen one right after another. So they're kind of get packaged into one. And that was when God had them sacrifice a lamb. And then everybody in Israel, they were to take the blood of the lamb and put it on the doorpost of their home, so that when God sent the destroyer into the land of Egypt to kill the firstborn, that if there was blood on the doorpost of the home, it says that the destroyer or the angel of the Lord would pass over that house. And they were to cook the lamb, they were to eat it that night. And then at midnight, God struck down the firstborn in the land of Egypt, the firstborn of all the people, the firstborn of all of the animals, unless there was blood on the doorpost. And here Moses is talking. He says, then Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery. For by a strong hand Yahweh brought you out from this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. Today in the month of Abib, you are going out. And when Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the 7th day there shall be a feast to Yahweh. Unleavened shall be eaten for 7 days. No leavened bread shall be seen with you, and no leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory. You shall tell your son on that day, it is because of what Yahweh did for me when I came out of Egypt. And it shall be to you as a sign on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of Yahweh may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand Yahweh has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this statute at its appointed time from year to year. So he's telling Israel, remember this day. Remember the day that I led you to Egypt. And he said that this day, your remembrance of this day is going to be a sign. It's going to be a signifier. And he says that it's going to be a sign on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, which would be your forehead. And so it's not, there's a spiritual component to it, but let's keep going. Then later on in Exodus 13, it says, when Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and shall give it to you, you shall set apart to Yahweh all that first opens the womb. All the firstborn of your animals that are males shall be Yahweh's. Every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. Every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And when in time to come your son asks you, what does this mean? You shall say to him, by a strong hand Yahweh brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, Yahweh killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of animals. Therefore I sacrifice to Yahweh all the males that first open the womb, but all the firstborns of my son I shall redeem. It shall be as a mark on your hand or frontlets between your eyes, for by a strong hand Yahweh brought us out of the land of Egypt. So dedicating their firstborn to God, the firstborn of the livestock, firstborn of the animals, and their firstborn son, they were either to be redeemed or they were to be killed. The animals, anyways, not their sons that were born. They were redeemed with the sacrifice of a lamb. And he says here that it's going to be a mark on your hand or frontlets between your eyes. And so we know this isn't talking in a literal sense, just like in talking about Passover, unleavened bread, that their remembrance of that day was going to be a sign on their hand or between their eyes, on their forehead. Basically, it wasn't something physical. You can't put that day physically on your hand or your forehead. Obviously, that's symbolic for something else. I believe Jarrett shared this video of the Shema a couple weeks ago. Oh, is it it might have been last week. Anyways, in Deuteronomy chapter 6, we get this poem sort of, and Israel recited it every day, or the people of Israel were to recite it. They were to remember it, memorize it, and it's called the Shema. And Shema in Hebrew means listen or hear. It's the first word that we see here. And it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength." And it's found in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And starting in verse 6 here, it says, "And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes." And so here he's saying these words, the Shema here, to remember this, that you need to teach it to your children. And then he says that you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. but we know he's not talking about like physically taking these words and putting them on your forehead, or physically taking them and putting them on your hand. Although a lot of Jews did that because they didn't understand what exactly God was getting at here. They had these things called phylacteries, I think, and some of them it was like a box, and they wrote the Shema on it, and then they tied it around their head. It was a big box, and they completely missed what God is getting at here. You know, I think that, and I'll touch on it here shortly. But Deuteronomy chapter 11 also talks about it. If you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, he will give you the rain for your land in its season. And then in verse 18, it says, you shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. And what I think God is getting at here is that when he says bind it to your hand, I think he's talking about our actions, like how we live our life should be reflective of what God has done for us. And in terms of Israel, that's how they were supposed to live their life. You know, the Shema, to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength. When you do that, your actions then speak to who your loyalty belongs to. And I think the hand speaks to their actions, you know, the things that they do, the work that they do, you know, those day-to-day activities, they should all be done in response to what God has already done for us. And in their case, it was bringing them out of Egypt, bringing them out of slavery. And then their forehead, they were to bind it on their forehead. I think that, you know, is reflective of our thoughts. Now, this is just my interpretation of it. You know, there may be more here, but I think, you know, when you're constantly aware of or reminded of something, it influences your actions. And I think that's what God was getting at here in saying, you know, because he said they are as a sign, and you're to bind them as frontlets between your eyes or on your forehead. And so I think John is pointing back to these, that what the beast requires the world to do is a reversal of what God asked Israel to do here. Let's see. I think we'll come back to this. We'll come back to this video. I want to look at there was an article that I read. It was a scholarly article. It's called "The Mark of the Beast as a Sign Commandment and Anti-Sabbath in the Worship Crisis of Revelation 12 through 14." You know, typical scholarly academic language. The titles are like super long. You know, they probably could have just got away with the mark of the beast as a sign commandment.
You're not frightening us, okay?
Yeah.
You're scaring us.
And so kind of it talks about multiple things in this article, but one of the things I want to draw our attention to is that there is, you know, the author argues that there is an Old Testament background to the mark of the beast, which, you know, I agree with, which I'm trying to point out right now. And then he argues that the mark of the beast is a sign commandment, you know, and that's what we looked at with these verses. They're called, he calls them sign commandments. And a sign commandment, they share the following characteristics, and this is based off of this work here. You know, they're concerned about remembering, and we saw that in Exodus. Remember this day, remember the Passover, you know, remember when God brought you out of Egypt. Remember. And then he says that these sign commandments, that they are identifying signs or symbols of a special relationship between God and the keeper. You know, when they kept these things, when they, you know, binded them to their hand or their forehead, that they were signifying to the rest of the world where their loyalty lied. And it was with the God of Israel. And oftentimes he said that they're ceremonial or ritual in nature, you know, in terms of like the Passover or the weekly Sabbath was a ritual or a ceremony that they partook in once a week. And it was in remembrance of creation, that God created the earth in 6 days and he rested on the seventh. And just as the weekly Sabbath, you know, Israel, they worked for 6 days and then they rested on the seventh. And it was in remembrance of what God did at creation. But there was a ceremonial or ritual aspect to it. And then so he argues in the paper that the mark of the beast is a sign commandment, you know, more so than it is a physical microchip or whatever. It's actually a signifier of where someone's loyalty lies. And so he says that the mark of the beast, explicitly draws on the placement imagery, because the mark goes on the right hand or the forehead, which I think, you know, is referencing, you know, active remembrance, you know, with our thoughts and our actions. We're remembering something, you know, our remembrance of a certain event affects how we live our lives. And that's what the mark of the beast does. He also says that the mark identifies that the wearer and the keeper are in a relationship of obedience to the beast. It identifies them because they can only buy or sell if you have the mark. And so it signifies some sort of relationship between the person bearing the mark and the beast. And then he says that the mark appears to be a command that involves participation in some manner of ritualized worship, because later on we see that God punishes those who took the mark and worshiped the beast. You know, taking the mark and worshiping the beast are sort of a package deal. So I think it's better to look at the mark as an outward identifier of where your loyalty lies. You know, those who follow the beast will be marked by the things that they do, the things that they say, how they act. But, and we went over this, I think last summer in Revelation 7, it says, after this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on the earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God. And he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. And so those who worship the beast receive a mark. Those who remain or stay loyal to Yahweh also receive a sign or a mark, and it also goes on their forehead. It's not a physical mark. You know, the mark is our actions. The mark is how we talk, the things that we say, you know, all of those things will show who our loyalty belongs to. Is it going to belong to the beast, or is it going to belong to Yahweh, to the one true God? And so I think this is probably the best summary of helping us understand what the mark is. You know, the author says that the opposite of receiving the mark of the beast is keeping the commandments of God, being obedient to Yahweh. And being obedient to him shows where our loyalty lies. And that's why the persecution happens, is because our loyalty is to God and not to the beast or the Antichrist. And we see in Revelation 12 that it says, then the dragon, this is talking about the woman, and she gives birth, and then the dragon is waiting to devour the baby as he's born, which is talking about Jesus. Says, then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And so the wrath of the beast is aimed at those who keep the commandment of God. So in the end, it's really going to come down to our loyalty. You know, will our loyalty be with the beast? And there will be signifiers that show who you're loyal to. You know, if you do this, this, or that, it shows that you're loyal to the beast. Whereas if you live your life this way and do this, this, or that, it shows that your loyalty is to Yahweh. And so the mark is, it's not so much as a physical thing. I think what's important to try and understand here is the spiritual component to it. And the mark, what the mark really comes down to is where your loyalty lies. And I think, and we'll look at this next week, I think that's where the name of the beast comes in. And in this article, it talks about how the beast is reversing or parodying or undoing the first 4 or 5 commandments of the 10 commandments. You know, it's basically a breaking of those. And the 3rd commandment is you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. And that's what we'll look at next week, is what does it mean to take God's name in vain? We have to understand first what it means to take God's name. Because Israel, they made a covenant with God that they were going to be loyal to him. And in essence, they were taking his name. You know, just like when you get married, you take, you know, the woman takes the man's name. And that's what Israel, they were taking the name of Yahweh. But if you live a cruddy life and you're a poor representative of what it means to be a follower of Yahweh, that's taking his name in vain. And so I think there is a marriage component to those who worship the beast, those who take the mark, those who worship the image. It's all tied up in loyalty. And so I want to go back to the video really quick. And when we watch this, it's talking about the history of the Shema. But while you're watching it, I want you to think of how there might be a reversal of this, how the beast might cause people to be loyal to him. So as we watch this, just keep that in the back of your mind.
For thousands of years, every morning and evening, Jewish people have prayed these well-known words as a way of expressing their devotion to God. They're called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. Now, the first word of the Shema is hear, or listen, which in Hebrew is pronounced Shema. That's where the prayer gets its name. Now, Shema is a really common word in the Hebrew Bible, and it's obvious why. Hearing is a very universal activity. It's usually connected with the ear, as in Proverbs chapter 20. Ears that shema and eyes that see, The Lord has made them both. Now that seems basic enough, but if you look at the other ways that Hebrew authors can use the word Shema, they use it to mean more than just let sound waves enter your ear. In Hebrew, Shema can also mean pay attention to or focus on. So when Leah, who wasn't loved by her husband Jacob, she has a son, and she names him Simon, or in Hebrew, Shim'on, because, she says, the Lord has sham'ad, that I am unloved. So Shema means to hear and to pay attention to, and even more. It can also mean responding to what you hear. This is why so many of the cries for help in the book of Psalms begin with a call that God listen. Psalm 27, verse 7. Shema my voice when I call, O Lord. Be merciful, answer me. So asking God to Shema is at the same time asking God to act, to do something. It's similar to when God asks people to listen. Like when the people of Israel come to Mount Sinai, God says, if you Shema me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Now there's a couple interesting things about this verse in Exodus. In Hebrew, the word Shema is repeated twice in this sentence to give it emphasis. If you Shema, Shema, meaning listen closely. But also notice that from God's point of view, listening is basically the same as keeping the covenant. So when God asks the people to Shema, what he means is that they listen and obey. And that's the last fascinating thing about Shema. In ancient Hebrew, there is no separate word for obey, meaning to carry out the wishes of someone who knows better than you or is in authority over you. So in the Bible, if you want to say, I will listen and do what you say, you use the single word, Shema. In Hebrew, listening and doing are two sides of the same coin. This is why later in Israel's history, when the people were breaking their covenant promises to God, the Hebrew prophets would say things like, they have ears, but they're not listening. The Israelites, of course, could hear just fine, but they weren't actually listening, or else they would act differently. And so in the end, listening in the Bible is about giving respect to the one speaking to you and doing what they say. Real listening takes effort and action, and that's the Hebrew word Shema.
And so it comes back to, it comes back to this. Who are we going to listen to and obey? Are we going to listen to the beast and obey him, or are we going to listen to Yahweh and obey him? And now I think that it's possible that there could be some type of event. You know, Jesus talks about a deception that happens, or he sends a great delusion. And I think it's tied to the beast, tied to the Antichrist. He might do something that is convincing to the world to listen to him and to obey him. And I think that's also tied to the falling away of the Christians at the end, that they get deceived by that as well, that they, instead of listening to God and obeying him, they're going to switch up their loyalties to the beast, and they're going to listen to him and obey him. And so the mark really the mark could be some sort of anti-Shema. And so it really comes down to where you're loyal. The mark is really about loyalty and not a microchip.
Okay, that's your material for today.
Yep.
And I was thinking, because you keep, mentioning the word loyalty, and of course that also speaks about devotion.
Yep.
Loyalty is something to do also with your heart and of course your action. But I'm just thinking about marriage relationship, and instead of like it's having the e-ring, the ring, the wedding ring, the engagement ring. What does this signify? That you're taken, that you own to somebody.
Yep.
And I think the mark of the beast is like that. It would signify who you belong to and who you follow and who you obey.
Yep.
Now this is a big one, because many Christians actually are focused on the physical thing, the mark.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you may not have the physical mark of the beast, but actually in your heart, you already made a choice who you belong to, who you're loyal to.
Yep.
And that is actually more scary because, I'm sorry, because you could really be misled. Like what you said, you could be deceived.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, it has really become a distraction. People are talking about it. Is it the microchip or is it something, the mark of the
Yeah.
beast? I mean, you may not have any physical mark on yourself.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yep. And I think too, like we know that the mark is tied to the image too.